Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, here we are for our first official podcast of the Agronomy and Farm Management series. A few weeks ago, we didn't think winter would end and planting would begin, and then all of a sudden a window opened up and there were a lot of farms that were able to get 50% or more of their planting done that first week of May. Unlike last year, we haven't had a harsh cold front move through and ruin all that hard work either. So hopefully that continues. The extended forecast looks pretty favorable for getting plants out of the ground. Unless you have a cold front planting study like I do, then you kind of hope for bad weather. But that's okay. We had a good year for it last year to get some data. So Elizabeth, what on-farm research projects do you have going on this year?
Well, as part of the eFields program, I have some seeding rate studies going out that we're using to improve our variable rate seeding recommendations for both corn and soybean. One I'm particularly excited about, though, is the nitrogen decision study that we're using to look at the different types of data we can collect in season that could help farmers make nitrogen timing and rate decisions. One important factor we're considering in this research is how much weather impacts our nitrogen needs. So to get an idea of what we can expect this growing season, we've invited Erin Wilson, the Senior Research Associate at Bird Polar and Climate Research Center. And you have somewhat recently gained an extension appointment, which we love, by the way. Welcome.
Yes, I have. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Let's start by looking at this past winter and spring. How does it play into what we'll see this growing season?
Yeah, so certainly we've had these cold conditions that have extended much of late winter into spring and have really challenged the early planting or early activities here with the farmers throughout the state. A lot of this, the result of our La Nina pattern that we have. So let me describe that a little bit. We look to the tropical Pacific Ocean to look at the sea surface temperatures and how they compare to normal. When they're cooler than average, we call this a La Nina. That's the situation that we've been in for the past couple of months. The opposite of that, of course, would be warmer than average temperatures, which we call El Nino. For La Nina conditions like we've experienced this year, really has an influence on the moisture availability. So we tend to have an active pattern, frequent systems moving through, and a lot of precipitation. And because of that precipitation that we've seen and the wet conditions, it's really helped keep temperatures down a bit as we've progressed from winter into early spring.
So how are we looking out there right now? I know there's a lot of variability across the state talking to other farmers and extension educators as far as soil moisture, growing conditions, planting progress.
Yeah, so as I mentioned with the La Nina conditions, we pretty much of the state is very wet soils. And like you said in the opening, we've opened up here in the beginning of May. Much warmer conditions, drier conditions, extended days of dry weather, and this has, allowed parts of certainly southern and central Ohio to really, get out there and planting in terms of the fields. We're sitting with still a lot of soil moisture in a lot of areas, particularly across northern Ohio, northwest Ohio. Northwest Ohio, the first week of May, saw an event of 2 to 4 inches. Which has really probably slowed things down up in that region. But you just have to go, a couple hundred miles south into southwest Ohio, where some areas have seen now just about 25% of normal, 30% of normal precip over the last 30 days. So that really speaks to the variability that we're seeing. With the cold, the cooler temperatures that we've had, we've got average soil temperatures now generally around 60 degrees. This is really allowing the emergence to take place as there's a good amount of heat in the soil and that sort of thing now. So that's where we are, and that really the wet conditions in the soil, like I said, really played into those cooler conditions, and we don't really have any moisture deficit issues or concerns at this time.
Great.
So Erin, what do you think the rest of May is going to look like?
Yeah, so when we're looking at guidance for a long range forecast, so we're looking out now from the mid-May to the end of the month, confidence is pretty high that our temperatures are going to be a little above average. So we're looking at generally highs from the mid 70s to maybe low 80s throughout much of the month. Obviously, we can't forecast an exact number 14 days from now, but our signals that we look at certainly suggest that conditions through the rest of May should be warmer than average. As far as precipitation goes, there's not really a strong signal either way, except in the southern half of the state. There's some indication, most recent indication, that may be a little bit elevated in terms of precip there. But again, not a really strong signal either way when it comes to the precipitation guidance.
So what about kind of extended summer forecast looking out month and a half or so?
Yeah, so summertime is a very difficult time for seasonal forecasting. When you're looking, we're basically a month and a half now or so from June, that June, July, August period. I would say our background trends, which is one of the indicators we use, is to be above normal. Particularly when it comes to overnight lows, that we know that that's a long-term trend. So that's something that's always in the back of our minds in terms of what's going to happen this summer. The other anticipated event next year for our cold season would be the development of an El Nino. So there are some indicators, some conditions that come on prior to an El Nino event, like much of the northern United States, often before an El Nino, will have a cooler summer. So how much of that's going to impact the Ohio Valley region, that's some question coming in to this upcoming outlook. But we certainly think if we had to lean one way, it would be slightly higher confidence to warmer than average conditions, again, for those overnight lows. And with precipitation, summer is highly variable. A lot of scattered, isolated, scattered thunderstorms most of the time for our region. The Climate Prediction Center, which also use some model guidance, so the computer models to help look at the seasonal forecast, are indicating maybe a slightly elevated in terms of above normal precipitation, so slightly higher confidence in above normal precip, but it's really hard to nail down exact numbers, this far out.
Have you looked at forecasts across the United States, the Corn Belt in particular? Is there similarities of what we're expecting here to there? Are they going to be drier or wetter than us?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the summertime, right now, according to the Climate Prediction Center, we would be a little bit wetter than, say, the western Corn Belt region, where the signals aren't quite as strong. And again, depending on this development of El Nino next season and what we're going to see this summer, parts of the upper Midwest and even northern Great Plains, they still have that opportunity for below average temperatures there, which it's not a very strong signal, but that's also something to keep in mind. So I think we're going to, again, lean toward warmer than average conditions, most likely here, with a little bit elevated confidence and higher precipitation compared to the western Corn Belt, Iowa and the Dakotas and such.
Okay.
So, Aaron, when you're looking at these trends, are there any years historically that what we're looking at reminds you of?
Yeah, so if we think about our La Nina seasons, we can go back to 2012, certainly, which probably strikes fear in a lot of people's minds across the Midwest and much of the eastern United States, as that obviously was a year we had a significant drought. That was certainly, here in Ohio, dry, warm conditions, especially later in the season. Before that, you've got to go back to 2009, and that was a little bit different. Wetter, cooler conditions, which really, when we look at El Nino as a signal, certainly it can give us some clues, but it's a much better predictor of our wintertime weather than it is our summertime. Summer just is it's highly variable. We know that the variability in our climate system is increasing, and so it makes it difficult to do these seasonal forecasts. But certainly we have to use the guidance that's available to us. But those are the 2 years that come to mind. Again, I think the first half of May here has been pretty exceptional for a lot of areas of Ohio in terms of planting, and maybe with the strong emergence and strong development of roots, any dry weather we do see later in the season can be offset, a little bit resilience due to that. But yeah, so it's those are the two La Nina events that come to mind, but we don't get an event every year. We don't get an El Nino or a La Nina every year, so there's a lot of other climate factors that go into that. One of those being the soil moisture. How much soil moisture do you have in the season? And Ohio's looking pretty good right now. A little dry in the west, but looking pretty good right now.
Aaron, you've talked a lot about how this forecast would be compared to normal. Can you go into a little more detail about what is normal?
Yeah, certainly. So normal, we use that term a lot. Our normal temperatures and precipitation are based on a 30-year period. So right now we take the conditions that occurred on any particular day between 1981 and 2010. And you just take the means, the average over that period, and that gives your normal high, normal low. That gives your normal precipitation for that date. And then you add that up for the month to get your average monthly total precipitation. So that's how we develop normal, or other term we use is average. So what's the average conditions over those 30 years? Now every 10 years that normal does slide. It changes, right? So previously we were 1971 to 2000. Now we're 1981 to 2010. And in 2021 we'll be 1991 to 2020, right? So you do slide that normal, that 30-day window when it comes to the National Weather Service and how they indicate normal conditions.
Yeah, that's interesting because we definitely have seen some changes over the last several years. Is there a trend that you're seeing with those normals? Are they like summer normals increasing in temperature, precipitation events? What's that trend been like?
Yeah, so we can talk about several trends that have happened and what we're seeing. And a lot of times what we do is we compare over a much longer period. So we compare, say, the changes between early 20th century with early 21st century. So that gives us a broader perspective. If you think about what our parents and grandparents and how they were farming in the 50s and 60s, how is that different than what the conditions that we're seeing today? In Ohio, we are warming. We're warming more during the wintertime than we are in the summertime. And our summertime warming trends have been overnight lows, have highly driven by, say, days where we are above 70 degrees overnight. And that has a lot of impacts in the ag sector in terms of crop production. So that is the strong the trend in terms of temperature. With precipitation, we do see our annual precipitation is increasing. Over those two time periods between the 21st and the 20th century, we see about 3 inches more a year on average than we did in that early 20th century. Strongly driven by fall precip, so we tend to see about 1.5 inches more precip during the fall season than we did previously, and so that's challenging the harvest season for sure. The other thing is that even though the annual precipitation is up and there's changes in the seasonal cycle, the whole hydrologic cycle has shown signs of intensification as well. So we're seeing stronger, more extreme precipitation events, singular events where you see more than 2 or 3 inch events, punctuating maybe extended dry periods. But we haven't seen any really large scale decadal type droughts like we did back in the 30s and the 50s. But we do get these intense dry periods punctuated by very heavy rainfall, and that's a whole new set of management questions as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been talking about that, especially when it comes to fertilizer management. How do we deal with these strong rain events? Because that seems to be what we get pretty frequently these days.
Yeah, and I think it's also challenging, things like erosion, and healthy soils. It's a challenge, I think, in all of those areas.
Yeah. Aaron, at the Conservation Tillage Conference, you brought up the farm app. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of years ago, at the end of 2016, actually, Extension approached the State Climate Office of Ohio to come up with a way or a tool to help farmers in their decision making to remain compliant with SB1 regulations of fertilizer and manure application in Northwest Ohio. Over the last year and a half, we've developed a tool which we call the Farm app. And one thing that became apparent is obviously there are a lot of tools that have been developed to help with nutrient management, from OnMark's record keeping to other indices that have been used. One of the things that was really lacking, and one thing that we wanted to stress, was the ability to pull up a previous forecast, so that you could go have a database that you could rely on, that you can go back and say, 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, what was the forecast for that particular day? And to get what the precipitation forecast was in terms of was it, within the regulation or recommended limits. So we've developed the farm app that does that. It does other things as well. So, a lot of your farming tools allow you to draw your fields and get your locations, and you'll get a weather forecast. But we also sort of break it down into, based on those regulations, any point in the state really, though, you can use those recommended limits, and you can see, okay, so do I have a green light or a red light based on those recommendations today? So we've added that into the tool as well, and then we're hoping to expand it to do a lot more. We've did a lot of user testing. We wanted this tool to be something that the farmers wanted to use, not just create a product out there and then beg people to use it. We want it to be useful, and so we've developed it from that standpoint. So we've heard a lot of farmers talk about, well, I love wind conditions and temperature inversion monitoring, and so there really the sky's the limit, I think, in terms of how we expect farm app to continue to develop in the future.
And where do we find it at?
Yeah, so you can find the app at farm.bpcrc.osu.edu.
Okay.
And you can sign up there, and then you can also, so you can view as a guest. You don't never have to sign in if you don't want to. You can choose to sign in, then you're guaranteed to keep your fields delineated and the conditions coming in. And so you have that option of an account or non-account. And you can sign up there, and you can use it, obviously, desktop or mobile platform as well.
Awesome. Sounds great. What about other research activities you have going on?
Yeah, so, because I have this recent extension appointment, I think it's really, it's been fun to kind of connect the dots between what State Climate Office is doing and extension as well. Obviously, temperature inversions and drift monitoring are a key concern of extension in terms of educating on proper times of spray and that sort of thing. So, with the help of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub, we've been able to secure some equipment that we're going to be putting an additional temperature sensor on the OARDC weather system network that will then allow us to get temperatures closer to the surface and then also at 3 meter elevation, or altitude rather, above the ground surface. So when you have two different temperature measurements throughout, you can get a profile and kind of monitor for temperature inversion situations that will help then the farmer in terms of making the decision of whether to safely spray or not. So that's another example that we're doing. We've also teamed up with Sustainable and Resilient Economies. We've teamed up with a couple other units here on campus, risk and decision making, for this larger USDA NIFA grant that we received, really working to integrate climate with farmer decision making, ecosystems, and also resilient economies, to do an integrated modeling of approach for all of this. So we can think about things like food security. We can think about ecosystems into the future with this climate component added into it as well. And so, and then teaming up with farmer decisions and that whole decision-making process. So those are a couple of examples of work that we have coming down the pipeline here.
It's interesting. So what are some other resources available? People might be interested in learning more or following some weekly reports.
Yeah, sure. So the mission of the Climate Office really is to be data stewards to a lot of the different sectors in Ohio. But with Extension, we've really been able to incorporate and grow the ag side of things. So you can check out climate.osu.edu. That's our website. There you'll find weekly 30-day and 90-day anomaly maps for temperature and precipitation. You'll also find a short 5 to 10 minute video blog on this week's hydrological and also climate assessment there, as well as quarterly climate summary. So any climate information that you want, you can find there at our website. Again, that's climate.osu.edu.
Great. Thanks.
Well, Aaron, thanks for joining us today. I enjoyed learning about the weather outlook, and I'm excited to check back and see how accurate your predictions were.
Well, thank you, and with any luck, I'll at least be half right.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.